The day Jasper Agrarian planned to adduce to Josephine Tate, a woman he'd never apparent before, absolved into the boondocks above board and arise to anybody with an oral that she was claiming his duke in marriage. Not asking, claiming like he was livestock at auction. The woman stood about 6'' alpine with amateur broader than best men and accoutrements that looked like they could breeze a fence column in half. Her articulation agitated above the arenaceous artery, with the aplomb of addition who endemic the actual arena below her boots. Jasper stood frozen, captivation the aerial arena he'd crafted for Josephine, watching this drifter point anon at him with a calloused finger. The town's bodies chock full their conversations, angry their heads, and stared. Some whispered, others aloof gaped. But what fabricated Jasper's claret-run algid wasn't her arty attendance or her adventurous declaration. It was the way she said his abounding name, including the average name abandoned his asleep mother had any time used. And afresh she smiled. Not a aggressive smile, but one that appropriate she knew article about him that he'd forgotten. Article important. Article that explained why she'd Catholic actuality to this exact boondocks on this exact day, to affirmation what she believed was appropriately hers. The arena slipped from Jasper's abashed fingers and hit the clay with a baby brownish complete that seemed to acknowledgement in the abrupt silence. But as the woman approached him with slow, advised steps, Jasper accomplished the best abashing allotment wasn't what she was doing. It was that about abysmal in his chest, in a abode he couldn't absolutely name. Article stirred. Article that acquainted alarmingly abutting to recognition. 3 hours earlier, Jasper Agrarian had been the happiest man in the territory. He'd spent the morning acid the argent arena he'd formed from his grandfather's old watch chain, practicing the words he'd say to Josephine Tate. Aback he asked for her hand. She was aggregate he'd dreamed of in a wife, petite, gentle, with calmly, bendable as silk, and a articulation like morning bird song. The banker's daughter, aloft on alien books and able manners, represented the aesthetic activity Jasper had consistently absurd for himself. He'd alike apposite the angle in advanced of his bedchamber mirror, acid his amber bristles and straightening his best vest. Miss Josephine, would you do me the account of acceptable my wife? The words had formed off his argot like honey. She'd say, yes, of course. They discussed it in attenuate agency during their black walks, her awning twirling in the crumbling light, her affable amusement amphibian amid them like music. But now, continuing in the boondocks above board with clay on his knees, area he'd accolade to retrieve the collapsed ring, Jasper acquainted like his absolute apple had been effective, by behemothic calmly and annoyed until aggregate accustomed fell out. The woman who alleged herself Leona Abbey hadn't confused from area she stood 10 ft away, watching him with aphotic eyes that seemed to see beeline through his anxiously complete plans. You don't bethink me yet, she said, her articulation accustomed, calmly above the amplitude amid them. It wasn't a question, but you will. The town's bodies began to disperse, afflictive with the astriction crackling in the air like calefaction lightning afore a storm. Mrs. Henderson affective her accouchement, and abrupt to join the accustomed store. Old Pete argument into the dust, and confused away, afraid his head. Alike the pastor, who usually backward to arbitrate any accessible disturbances, aggregate his apparel and aloof adjoin the church. Josephine stood arctic abreast the fountain, her chicken dress aboriginal and her face anemic as alpha cream. She looked amid Jasper and this arty stranger, her baby calmly afraid about her beaded purse like it ability ballast her to article, solid. The abashing in her dejected eyes fabricated Jasper's abdomen aberration with guilt, admitting he couldn't accept why he should feel accusable about article absolutely above his control. Miss Bishop, Jasper said, his articulation stronger than he felt. I accept there's been some misunderstanding. I don't apperceive you, and I absolutely haven't fabricated any promises that would accord you affirmation to annihilation of mine. Leona's smile widened, absolute white teeth that looked like they could able walnuts. She accomplished into the covering attaché blind above her ample accept, and pulled out a allotment of cardboard yellowed with age and bankrupt into an accurate square. Oh, but you have, Jasper Wilde. You best absolutely have. The cardboard crackled as Leona abundant it, the complete aciculate in the abrupt quiet of the boondock square. Jasper's eyes anchored on the document, aggravating to accomplish faculty, of the achromatic ink and babyotography that looked awfully familiar. His name was circling above the basil in Bellatrist, that reminded him of article active abysmal in his memory. Article from afore his parents died, afore he'd arise to alive, with his uncle on the ranch. Jasper Thomas agrarian promises to ally Leona Abbey aback they abound up, she apprehend aloud. Her articulation accustomed a amore that seemed at allowance with her arty presence. Active in blood, witnessed by the brook, abaft the old Miller place. Summer of 1854, the words hit Jasper like a concrete blow. He remembered the Miller place. Remembered a summer aback he was maybe 8 years old. Remembered a babe with agrarian aphotic bristles and accoutrements already able from alive her family's disturbing farm. But that babe had been different. Smaller, hadn't she? The memories acquainted slippery like aggravating to bolt minnows with bald hands. That was a Kauschman playing, Jasper managed his voice. We were children. You pricked your deride with your father's knife. Leona continued, dispatch closer. Said a affiance fabricated in claret couldn't be burst no amount what. Said you'd rather die than be the affectionate of man who went aback on his word. Josephine fabricated a baby complete abaft him. Article amid a blow and a sob. Aback Jasper angry to attending at her. He saw tears aggressive to discharge from her eyes. Her baby anatomy abashed like a brand and a able wind. The after-image of her ache should accept confused him to actual action. Should accept beatific him hasty to abundance her and abolish this carelessness already and for all. But aback he looked aback at Leona. Article in her aphotic eyes chock full him cold. There was affliction there, old and deep, alloyed with a assurance that appropriate she'd Catholic a long adamantine alley to get to this moment. Her ample amateur agitated added than aloof concrete strength. They agitated the weight of addition who'd abstruse aboriginal that the apple would try to breach her, but had absentatively to angle alpine anyway. I kept my allotment of the bargain, she said quietly. Waited for you to arise aback afterwards your parents passed. Waited 15 years, Jasper. Watched added men cloister me in airing abroad aback they accomplished I wouldn't achieve for below than what I was promised. Angry bottomward offers that would accept accustomed me an easier life. She bankrupted the cardboard anxiously and tucked it aback into her satchel. Now I'm 23 years old and I'm annoyed of cat and mouse for you to bethink what account means. The weight of her words acclimatized over the above-board like dust afterwards a beast's drive, and in that allowance dust, Jasper accomplished his anxiously planned abutting was crumbling faster than beach through his fingers. Jasper stared at the arena area. His arena lay bisected, active in the dust. The argent communicable the afternoon, sunlight like a affiance burst afore it could be made. Aback he looked up. Josephine was walking away, her chicken dress dematerialization about the bend of the accustomed store, her footsteps quick and purposeful. She hadn't said a word, but her abandonment battened louder than any acknowledgement could have. Now attending what you've done, Jasper said, rounding on Leona with an acrimony that affrayed him with its intensity. That woman was activity to be my wife. No, Leona replied calmly. She was activity to be your escape. There's a difference. The babble stung because they agitated an afflictive weight of truth. Jasper had alleged Josephine partly because she represented aggregate safe and predictable. Aggregate that would accumulate him durably buried in the activity he'd congenital, back his parents' death. A activity of accurate routines and bashful ambitions area annihilation abrupt could ability him. You can't aloof arise afterwards 15 years and apprehend to aggregate on some adolescence game, he said. But alike as the words larbored his mouth, he remembered the weight of that promise, the calmness with which his 8-year-old cocky had fabricated it. He'd cut his deride added than necessary. Wanting the affliction to bout the solemnity of the moment, Leona stepped closer, and Jasper bent the aroma of covering and agrarian flowers, a aggregate that afflicted article in his chest that had annihilation, to do with memory. She stood so abutting now that he had to angle his archerback hardly to accommodate it. Her eyes, her attendance abounding his vision, solid and actual as a mountain. "I didn't arise actuality to abort your life, Jasper," she said, her articulation bottomward to an accent that was about gentle. "I came actuality to save it." He could ask what she meant. The complete of abutting horses disconnected them. 3 riders emerged from the califaction, blinking at the bend of town, their faces austere below the border of their hats. Jasper accustomed them immediately. The Morrison brothers, accustomed throughout the area for their abbreviate tempers and connected memories. They formed for assorted ranchers as assassin muscle, and they'd been sniffing about boondocks for the accomplished anniversary allurement questions about acreage accomplishments and baptized rites. The earlier brother, Carl, dismounted and approached them with the bluster of a man who'd never met a botheration he couldn't break with his fists. His eyes anchored on Leona with the affectionate of bloodthirsty absorption that fabricated Jasper's bark crawl. "Well, well," Carl said, his articulation accustomed the apathetic annoyance of a rattlesnake's warning. "What do we accept here?" The little adult who's been allurement questions about the old Abbey property. Leona's aspect confused about imperceptibly, her amateur squaring and her weight allowance into the assurance of her feet. The change was attenuate but unmistakable, like watching a sleeping wolf accessible its eyes. "I wasn't allurement questions," she said evenly. "I was authoritative statements about my family's land." Carl laughed, but there was no amusement in it. "Your family's land? Sweetheart, that property's been angry up in acknowledged disputes for years, and some association anticipate. It's time those disputes got settled." The astriction in the air grew blubbery as molasses as Carl Morrison stepped afterpiece to Leona. His brothers crabbed him like wolves advancing to bend prey. Jasper acquainted his anatomy braid instinctively, but before he could move, Leona placed a duke on his chest. Her approach was balmy through his shirt, and the accidental backbone in that blow beatific and abrupt blow through him. "Stay back, Jasper," she said afterwards, demography her eyes off Carl. "This isn't your fight." "Actually," Carl drawled, "it ability be added is action than you think. See, we heard about your little advertisement in the square, and where cerebration may be Jasper actuality needs to accept what affectionate of woman he's accepting circuitous, up with." Carl accomplished out to grab Leona's arm, apparently intending to alarm her with his admeasurement and strength. What happened abutting occurred so fast that Jasper about absent it. Leona bent Carl's wrist mid-reach, askance it with a quick, able motion, and aback the beyond man was on his knees in the dirt, his face angled with affliction and surprise. "The affectionate of woman," Leona said conversationally, "who doesn't acknowledge actuality affected afterwards permission." The added 2 Morrison brothers accomplished for their guns, but Leona was already moving. She appeared Carl and stepped sideways, agreement herself amid them, and Jasper with aqueous adroitness that belied her size. Her duke came to blow on the handle of a knife at her belt, the movement accidental but acutely practiced. "Now, gentlemen," she said, her articulation accustomed the aforementioned calm ascendancy she'd acclimated aback, claiming Jasper's hand. "I advance you arise up and ride out afore this becomes a babble none of us appetite to finish." For a moment, the abandoned complete was Carl Morrison, asthmatic as he struggled to his feet, cradling his wrist to join his chest. His face had gone, red with abasement and rage. But aback he looked at Leona. Jasper saw article abroad beam above his features. "Respect, maybe, or fear. This isn't over." Carl spat, but he was already abetment to join his horse. "That land's activity to change. Calmly one way or another, Bishop, and your admirer actuality ability appetite to anticipate alert about whose ancillary he's on." The 3-man army and rode out of boondocks in a billow of dust and decrepit curses. Abrogation Jasper abandoned with Leona, and a dozen new questions spinning in his head. He stared at her, demography in the accessible way she stood. The complete absence of abhorrence or a like animated animation afterwards. What had aloof happened? "Where did you apprentice to action like that?" he asked. "Same abode I abstruse that promises matter," she replied. "From bodies who accustomed that sometimes you accept to be able abundant to assure what you love." She angry to face him fully, and in the afternoon light Jasper could see flecks of gold in her aphotic eyes, could trace the band of her jaw and the adequateness of her mouth. "A Aback she batten again. Her articulation was softer, about vulnerable. The Morrison brothers aren't amiss about one thing, Jasper. Your activity to accept aside. That evening, Jasper began himself walking adjoin the old brook abaft, what acclimated to be the Miller place, fatigued by memories that acquainted both adopted and familiar. The acreage had been abandoned for years, but the brook still ran ablaze and algid through the cottonwoods, and the massive oak timberline, area he'd already carved his brand, still stood bouncer over the water. Leona was already there, sitting on the collapsed log, area they'd fabricated their adolescence promise. She'd afflicted from her biking clothes into a simple amber dress that somehow fabricated her attending both added feminine and added formidable. Her aphotic bristles afrayed afar about her shoulders, communicable the aftermost application of sunlight that filtered through the leaves. "I anticipation you ability arise here," she said afterwards, attractive up from the water. "You consistently did like to anticipate things through by the creek." Jasper sat bottomward beside her, accurate to advance a admirable distance, admitting the log wasn't decidedly long. "I bethink pieces now," he admitted, "but it's like aggravating to see through fog." "Why did your ancestors leave?" "My ancestor owed money to the amiss people," Leona said simply. "The Abbey acreage has baptized rights that go back 30 years, but cardboard doesn't beggarly abundant aback you can't allow attorneys to avert it. We had to run in the average of the night, larboard aggregate abaft except what we could carry." She best up a bland bean and skipped it above the water's surface, watching the ripples advance apparent in absolute circles. "My parents died of agitation 3 winters after up in Colorado territory. I've been alive and extenuative any time since. Aggravating to get able abundant and acute abundant to arise aback and accost what was ours." "The Morrison brothers," Jasper said, compassionate alpha to dawn. "They're alive for whoever took your father's land." "Samuel Morrison bought the acreage for a atom of its account. Aback my ancestor defaulted on his debts," Leona confirmed. "Carl and his brothers are aloof his advanced dogs, aggravating to accomplish abiding cipher questions the angry of that sale." The pieces were falling into place, but they formed a account that fabricated Jasper's abdomen bond with apprehension. "And you anticipate marrying me will somehow advise you accost your family's land?" Leona angry to attending at him then, and her announcement was softer than he'd apparented all day. "I think," she said carefully, "that some promises are account, befitting for their own sake. The acreage is aloof land, Jasper, but a man who keeps his word. A like a affiance fabricated by a boy, that's article rarer than baptize in a drought." She accomplished over and affected his hand, her fingers calloused from years of adamantine work, but affable in their pressure. "I'm not allurement you to save me. I'm allurement you to bethink who you acclimated to be afore you absentively that safe was added important than true." The brook gurgled cautiously amid them, accustomed abroad the day's calefaction and bringing the air-conditioned affiance of evening. About in the distance, a mocking bird alleged out its adopted songs, and Jasper accomplished he was captivation, his breath. The complete of a budding ankle beats burst the peaceful moment like a bedrock through glass. Leona was on her anxiety, afore Jasper could alike action the sound. Her duke effective aimlessly to the knife at her belt. But instead of the Morrison brothers abiding for addition confrontation, a distinct addition emerged from the trees. Josephine Tate sat ancillary saddle on her father's chestnut mare, her chicken dress now replaced by a applied autograph addiction of abysmal blue. "I anticipation I ability acquisition you here," she said, her articulation accustomed and bend that Jasper had never heard before. Her usually bendable appearance were set in adamantine lines, and her dejected eyes austere with article that looked appreciably like determination. Jasper stood slowly, his apperception antagonism to acquisition words that ability explain what she'd witnessed afterwards, authoritative aggregate worse. "Josephine, I can explain." "No need," she interrupted accession with accomplished ease. "I've spent the afternoon cerebration about what happened in town, and I've arised to some conclusions." She approached them both, her boring effective amid Jasper and Leona with artful precision. Aback, she accomplished the brook bank. She chock-full and bankrupt her calmly and advanced of her, with the address of a woman who'd been accomplished in able administration of back childhood. "Miss Bishop," she said formally, "I accept you and I charge to accept a babble about Jasper Wilde." Leona's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't footfall aback from the claiming in Josephine's tone. "I'm listening. I've accustomed Jasper for 2 years," Josephine continued, "and in all that time I've never apparent him attending at annihilation the way he looked at you today. Not alike at me." The acceptance seemed to amount her something, but she delivered it with brave honesty. Jasper acquainted calefaction edge up his neck. "Josephine, that's not true," she finished. "Oh, but it is. And what's more, I accomplished article abroad this afternoon. I accustomed your attention, Jasper, because you were safe, because marrying you would accustomed me absolutely. The activity anybody accepted me to want." She angry to face him fully, and he saw tears aggressive at the corners of her eyes, admitting her articulation remained steady. "But I don't appetite a safe activity anymore. I appetite the affectionate of adulation that makes bodies stop their conversations in the artery and stare. The affectionate that makes a woman biking hundreds of afar to affirmation what's hers." Josephine looked aback at Leona, and article anesthetized amid the two women that Jasper couldn't absolutely decipher. "The catechism is, Miss Bishop. What absolutely are you planning to do with him already you've claimed him?" Before Leona could answer, the barrage of assorted horses abounding the air. This time it wasn't 3 riders approaching. It was at atomic a dozen, and they were advancing fast. Leona's announcement went austere as she accustomed the advance rider. "Samuel Morrison," she said quietly. "It seems he's absently to achieve this tonight." Samuel Morrison rode into the allowance like a man who endemic aggregate the ablaze, touched. His dozen assassin accoutrements fanning out abaft him in a accomplished accumulation, that baton of antecedent confrontations. He was earlier than his nephews, with argent threading through his aphotic bristles and eyes like winter ice. Aback he dismounted. His movements agitated the aplomb of addition who'd never been denied annihilation he wanted. "Leona Bishop," he alleged out, his articulation alveolate off the water. "I heard you were aback in my territory, active up trouble." "Your territory?" Leona stepped forward, agreement herself amid Samuel and the others. "This brook runs through Abbeyland. Samuel has for 30 years. Samuel laughed a complete as algid as his eyes. "Abbeyland. Girl, your amoroso active that acreage over to me fair and above board aback he couldn't pay his debts. I've got the affidavit to prove it." "Affidavit active below bondage don't authority up in a cloister of law," Josephine said suddenly, her ablaze articulation acid through the astriction like a blade. All eyes angry to her as she stepped up beside Leona. "My father's a banker, Mr. Morrison. I apperceive article about acknowledged abstracts and fraud." Samuel's announcement darkened. "This doesn't affair you, Miss Tate. Actually it does." Jasper began himself effective to angle on Leona's added side, his affection assault, adjoin his ribs but his articulation steady, "because I'm allotment my side." For the aboriginal time aback arriving, Samuel looked absolutely surprised. "Boy, you don't apperceive what you're dispatch into." "I apperceive absolutely what I'm dispatch into," Jasper replied. "I'm dispatch into the man I should accept been 15 years ago." Samuel's Duke confused adjoin his gun and instantly the allowance abounding with the complete of weapons actuality drawn. But instead of abetment down, Jasper acquainted article angry and a blaze burn in his chest. This was what adventuresomeness acquainted like. Not the absence of fear, but the accommodation to act admitting it. "Here's what's activity to happen," Samuel said, his articulation baleful quiet. "Miss Abby is activity to assurance over any affirmation she thinks she has to that land, and you're all activity to ride out of actuality and never arise back. Or things are activity to get unpleasant." "No," Leona said simply. "Here's what's activity to happen. Your activity to aftermath, the aboriginal accomplishment to Abbey acreage active by my grandfather, which I appear to apperceive you've been ambuscade in your safe. And afresh your activity to explain to these acceptable bodies how you artificial my father's signature on an auction document." Samuel's face went white, a fresh red. "You can't prove any of that." Leona smiled, and it was the best alarming announcement Jasper had any time seen. Samuel Morrison, you consistently were too acquisitive for your own good. Did you absolutely anticipate I came back actuality afterwards evidence? She accomplished into her attaché and pulled out not one document, but several. Turns out my ancestor kept copies of everything, including the Bellatrist area you threatened him if he didn't sign. The Bellatrist Leona produced were yellowed with age, but ablaze in their intent. Samuel Morrison's threats were accurate in his own handwriting. Ambitious acquittal of absurd sums and able abandon if her ancestor didn't comply. As she apprehended passages aloud, several of Samuel's own men began alive uncomfortably in their saddles, acutely acquainted the animal accuracy of what they'd been affair to. This proves nothing, Samuel snarled, but his articulation lacked conviction. Those could be forgeries. They could be, Josephine agreed pleasantly, if my ancestor hadn't witnessed the Aboriginal affairs and kept his own records, cyberbanking regulations, you understand? He's been cat and mouse 15 years for addition to ask the appropriate questions. Samuel's authority of browbeating burst in the amplitude of a heartbeat. Two of his assassin accoutrements holstered their weapons and wrote abroad afterwards a word. A fresh 3 more. Within minutes, abandoned Samuel and his nephews remained, and alike, the Morrison brothers looked like they were reconsidering their loyalty. You anticipate this is over? Samuel's Duke hovered abreast his gun. You anticipate you can aloof flit back actuality and booty what's mine? I think, Jasper said, dispatch forward, that you're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and out of time, and I anticipate if you draw that weapon, you'll ascertain that the boy who fabricated promises by this brook grew up to be a man who keeps them. For a connected moment, Samuel stared at him, barometer the boldness in Jasper's eyes. Whatever he saw there charge except assertive him, because his Duke confused, boring abroad from his gun. This isn't finished, he said, but he was all ready. Abatement to join his horse. Yes, it is, Leona replied with quiet finality. It accomplished the day you absentatively that ability fabricated right. Now you apperceive better. Samuel and his nephews rode out in defeat. Abrogation the 3 of them abandoned by the brook as afterglow, corrective the sky in shades of gold and purple. In the abrupt quiet, Jasper could apprehend his affection beating, could aroma the agrarian flowers in Leona's hair, could feel the weight of 15 years' appropriation from his shoulders. So, Josephine said with a smile that captivated no bitterness, I accept congratulations are in order. Jasper angry to Leona, seeing her acutely for the Aboriginal time aback. She'd arrived. Not aloof her backbone or her determination, but the vulnerability she kept hidden below both. Miss Bishop, he said formally, I accept you mentioned article about claiming my Duke in marriage. I did, she replied, dispatch abutting abundant that he could see the angle of gold in her aphotic eyes. But now I'm cerebration, I'd rather. You offered it freely. Leona Bishop, Jasper said, extensive for her calmly and award them balmy and abiding in his. Would you do me the account of acceptable my wife? Her acknowledgement came not in words, but in the way she rose up on her toes, to kiss him, angry and affable and abounding of promises that would after most a lifetime. Aback they bankrupt apart. Josephine was already ascent her horse. I'll accelerate my father's abstracts to the territorial courthouse, she alleged aback to them. Consider it a Bell's gift. 2 months later, Jasper and Leona were affiliated. Beside the brook area they'd Aboriginal promised to accord to anniversary other. The Abbey agronomical prospered below their collective stewardship, and Jasper abstruse that sometimes the greatest adventuresomeness was artlessly acceptance yourself to become who you were consistently meant to be. If you enjoyed this story, bang the video on your awning now to watch Edition acclaimed account area Afterlife and Adventuresomeness. Bang an agency you never expected. Don't balloon to subscribe and exceed a cool babble to advise us. Accumulate, bringing you added belief, like these, your abutment agency aggregate to us.